Part 52. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 511. Swoosh. The whistling whip wind blew past, scaring the surrounding humans so much that they turned their heads away and closed their eyes. They could already see the bloody scene of the young man in front of them being whipped by the whip. However, as expected, an accident happened. The expected whipping and screaming did not come, but a low roar came from the mouth of the pig-headed orc. Some people looked up in surprise, but were immediately speechless in surprise. The man in the black robe in front stretched out his hand at the moment the whip fell, and firmly grasped the whip swung by the pig-headed orc. What really shocked everyone was not that the man took the whip, but the courage of the latter to resist the other party. "You kid, you are looking for death." It was the first time that the pig-headed orc was defeated in front of a human. He was furious and drew an iron sword from his waist and chopped towards Mewtwo's head. Just a human pariah. The pig-headed orc in leather armor had a fierce look in his eyes and muttered to himself, not taking these ant-like humans seriously at all. However, the next second, the man in front of him stretched out two fingers and clamped the iron sword swung by the pig-headed man. The pig-headed man's face changed, but he found that he could not shake these two seemingly slender fingers no matter what. Mewtwo narrowed his eyes, a faint light flashed in his eyes, energy surged on his right arm, and a thunder force blasted out. The electric current spread along the sword to the body of the pig-headed orc, who instantly twitched all over and his eyes turned white. And the next moment, the sturdy pig-headed orc and the armor he was wearing turned into ashes in front of everyone's eyes. The surrounding humans were shocked by Mewtwo's method and were speechless. Their faces were horrified, and the team behind them stopped. Mewtwo retracted his outstretched finger and looked at the orc ashes that had turned into dregs on the ground. For some reason, he seemed to feel a trace of the blood of the Eternal Night clan in this pig-headed orc. But this trace of blood was extremely weak. If Mewtwo was not the creator of the Eternal Night royal family, he would not even be able to feel it. Is it an illusion? Who is it? At this moment, other orc supervisors in the distance also noticed the abnormality and rushed to the front of the team with weapons in hand. When they saw the people kneeling around, there was only one standing black-robed figure, and they immediately attacked Mewtwo without saying anything. A lizard man stabbed Mewtwo with a steel fork, but was grabbed by Mewtwo's head. With a little force, the lizard man's head had burst like a watermelon. Mewtwo raised his hand with a chilling smile on his face. "Although it's still unclear what's going on, since you want to play, I'll help you relax your muscles." Mewtwo slowly raised his hand, and the thunder power swallowed from the body of the thunder god suddenly burst out. A series of golden arcs lingered between his arms, releasing a suffocating and terrifying breath. This kind of power, he is, an alien, a human alien. An orc saw this and immediately pointed at Mewtwo, whose arm was wrapped in electricity, and cried out in horror. The other orcs also looked horrified and looked at each other. "Let's go together and kill him." Many orcs of different shapes raised their weapons and charged at Mewtwo, as if they were going to use human wave tactics to surround and kill Mewtwo. Mewtwo's mouth curled up into a smile, and he turned his palm into a claw. The electric current on his fingertips crackled, and suddenly an arc of electricity passed in front of him, and a beam of lightning shot out. Under the clear daylight, a brilliant thunder flashed in front of the entire hill, and all the orcs who passed by were pierced by the thunder, and their bodies turned directly into a ball of flying ash. Under the horrified eyes of everyone, Mewtwo stood in place, and shot out countless powerful electric currents with one hand, spreading in the air like a spider web. The orcs who tried to pounce on him were hit by the electric current and their bodies instantly became charred, and some of them turned into a pool of slag and dissipated in the air. In just a moment, dozens of charred corpses were lying under Mewtwo's feet. Dozens of orc supervisors around were killed by him with just a wave of his hand. but Mewtwo looked at the charred corpses under his feet and the flying ash floating in the air, and shook his head secretly. He still hadn't completely mastered the power of thunder that he had just acquired, at least he was still not proficient in the use of strength. However, practice makes perfect, and I believe that after practicing for a while, his control over the power of thunder will surely rise to a higher level. Until then, Mukayufang slowly turned his head, smiled at the human old man who had just kindly reminded him, and said in a magnetic voice, "Now, please tell me, where is this place?" The old man looked at Mewtwo with trembling eyes, and stammered after a long while. "Here, this is the Bamo mine." "Bamo mine?" Mewtwo frowned, he didn't remember this place. Looking at the many humans who were still kneeling on the ground, fearful and terrified, thinking of what the white-robed man had said before, a bold guess emerged in Mewtwo's mind. He couldn't help but change his face, and suddenly asked, "What era is it now?" The old man immediately looked at Mewtwo with a strange look, and the fear in his eyes had not faded. "My lord, it is now 1,000 years of eternal night." "Eternal night, 1,000 years. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord." Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 512. Eternal night, 1,000 years. Hearing the familiar name, Mewtwo's expression looked a little strange. He asked the old man carefully about some things, and the results he got shocked him greatly. According to the old man, thousands of years have passed since the end of this world. But the people who rule this world now are not the humans who were the leader of all things in the past, nor are they the bloodthirsty zombies that have risen in the apocalypse. But it was the Yonjai royal family that was born in Mewtwo's hands and created by Mewtwo himself. After receiving this news, Mewtwo was immediately shocked, thinking of the words of the man in white robe. The latter actually sent him to the world 1,000 years later. The power of time and space. If he guessed correctly, the mysterious white-robed man's power is a space-time power that is even rarer than space power. But what Mewtwo didn't expect was that in this time and space, the Eternal Night royal family that he created would actually replace humans and become the ruler of this world. As soon as he thought about this, Mewtwo asked the old man about the end of the world and everything that happened to the Yonjai royal family. Originally, according to the strength of the Yonjai royal family, it should not be enough to replace the long-established human race and become the master of the world. But there is an innate characteristic possessed by the Yonjai royal family that completely reverses the pattern of the world. That is the terrifying fusion ability and abnormal reproductive ability. The royal family of Yonjai, with their various forms and extremely adaptable abilities, can mate and reproduce with all other races. The offspring he gave birth to not only inherited the talents of the previous generation, but also possessed vitality and intelligence far beyond those of ordinary races. And the bloodline of the Yonjai royal family is extremely powerful. After interbreeding with other races, most of the children born have the blood of the Yonjai people. Relying on this unique and terrifying talent, the Eternal Night royal family began to launch a crazy invasion of all races in the world. Tianlai Novel Network. The orcs, corpses, and even the corpses could not escape the claws of the Eternal Night royal family, and eventually they all assimilated into the subordinate races of the Eternal Night dynasty. The terrifying apocalypse disappeared without a trace in just a few years, and turned into a foreign world filled with the blood of the Eternal Night dynasty. At the beginning of the end of the world, the period before the establishment of the Yonjai dynasty was also called by later generations, the end of the century. But among them, there is a race that is not affected by the bloodline of the Yonjai royal family and is difficult to be assimilated by the Yonjai royal family. That is the human race known as the leader of all spirits. When the royal family of Yonjai intersects with humans, without exception, the offspring born are pure-blooded humans with pure blood. Most of these human races are ordinary people with no abilities. Only a very small number of genetic mutations can be lucky enough to become awakened people with supernatural powers. As a result, human beings were naturally ostracized and suppressed by the alien races full of Yonjai blood. All races, headed by the Yonjai royal family, began to reject the existence of human beings. After years of suppression, the human race, whose strength and talent were mediocre compared to other alien races, gradually fell to the lower end of the 10,000 races. Even thousands of years later, humans abandoned by heaven have become slave-like existences, enslaved and oppressed by all races, and bullied. In this world, human beings can be bought and sold at will like goods, taking life and death, and treating human life as nothing has become a naked reality here. Mu-Chiu listened thoughtfully to the old man's statement. The Eternal Night royal family was created by him personally, and his huge potential was naturally seen by him. As for why humans cannot merge with the bloodline of the Yonjai royal family, the reason is also very simple. Mu-Chiu used the human souls extracted from Zilan base as the foundation to create the royal family of Eternal Night. In a sense, the Yonjai royal family is a more advanced human being after evolution, and the latter will naturally not be affected by the Yonjai bloodline. At this moment, as the two asked and answered, some refugees had already fled in panic, running towards the hills in the distance. If the overseers here are killed by humans, then their fellow humans will also be implicated, and if they are not saved, they will be buried with them. They did not dare to vent their anger on the powerful Mu-Chiu. At this moment, they could only try their best to escape into the distance, and maybe they could get a glimmer of hope. The old man talking to Mu-Chiu also had weak legs, but he could only answer Mu-Chiu's questions patiently. And when Mu-Chiu asked how the end of the world ended, and the news about the alien cult and the 12 immortal priests, the old man actually knew nothing about these things, and had never even heard of the name of the pagan religion. It seems that the heterogeneous religion has long since disappeared in this era. Mu-Chiu did not ask about the news about the end of the world. Even this old man knew very little about what happened 1,000 years ago, and it was difficult to distinguish between true and false. Sir, although you are powerful as a human alien, you should leave here quickly. This mine belongs to the territory of the Lord of Machen. The old man consoled Mu-Chiu with sincerity and warned Mu-Chiu to leave this place as soon as possible. Lord, Mu-Chiu narrowed his eyes. He was still unclear about the rules of this world. The old man had a simple personality. Seeing Mu-Chiu's puzzled look, he thought that the other party was a member of the human tribe hiding in the deep mountains and forests, isolated from the outside world, so he quickly said. After the rumored Lord of Eternal Night mysteriously disappeared, some people said that his extraordinary strength broke the shackles of heaven and went to other worlds. Some people also say that the Lord of Eternal Night could not withstand the erosion of time and fell in the long river of time. The 12 Owl Kings he personally appointed also gradually disappeared. But the position of the 12 Owl Kings was retained, and they were replaced in the changes of time, becoming the real overlords who firmly controlled the 12 regions of the Eternal Night dynasty. And the Lord of Mo City is a subordinate of one of the Owl Kings who controls a territory. When the old man mentioned the titles such as Lord of Eternal Night and 12 Owl Kings, his tone could not help but tremble. Obviously, after years of influence, he has been in awe of such legendary existences. Mu-Chiu listened to the old man's explanation and rubbed his head with a headache. I was fighting with several Daiyuan level in the nest of 10,000 beasts just a moment ago, but now I have come to the world 1,000 years later inexplicably. He could not have imagined that so many changes would happen after he left. The Eternal Night royal family ended the chaos of the end of the world and replaced the human race as the new world master. The heterogeneous cult also disappeared. It seems that no one in the world 1,000 years later knows about the existence of this evil cult that caused chaos in the end of the world. No wonder Mu-Chiu felt a trace of the Eternal Night clan in the pig-headed orc just now. It turned out that the other party was the descendant of the Eternal Night royal family, but after layers of dilution of blood, the blood of the Eternal Night royal family in his body has become extremely weak. Thinking of this, Mu-Chiu's mouth twitched slightly. From now on, he has really become the ancestor of everyone in this world. Suddenly, Mewtwo seemed to think of something and suddenly said, "Wait, since according to what you said, the Lord of the Eternal Night mysteriously disappeared, then who has ruled the Eternal Night dynasty for thousands of years?" The old man's eyes became a little weird, looking at Mewtwo as if he was looking at a savage. Seeing the other party's serious look, the old man thought Mewtwo was crazy, so he could only sigh and said, "The one who now rules the Eternal Night dynasty is the 9th generation Demon Lord." The 9th generation Demon Lord. Mewtwo pondered the title and heard the meaning. "From what you said, there are 8 Demon Lords before him." The old man nodded, with extreme fear in his eyes. After thousands of years of changes, the Eternal Night dynasty has experienced the rule of 8 kings. They are the real masters of this world. And the first generation of Demon Lord is the founder of the Eternal Night dynasty, creating the supreme of the Eternal Night royal family, worshipped by all races. Lord of the Eternal Night. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 513. The First Generation Demon Lord. Mewtwo was a little dumbfounded. She didn't expect that future generations would actually give herself such a name. He turned around and looked around, and found that some humans had fled frantically down the mine in the distance, while others looked at Mewtwo at a loss, with frightened expressions on their faces. The few remaining people stood there with numb expressions, unmoved by the violent wind and sand hitting their dry faces. In front of the ferocious Yonjai clan, their resistance seemed so weak. Even if they can escape by chance, in the outside world full of alien races, humans are still the lowest race, subject to bullying and oppression, and have no human rights at all. Looking at the numb-eyed people, Mewtwo could sense that these were ordinary humans with no special powers in their bodies. With the blessing of the bloodline of the Evernight royal family, the racial talents of each major race will more or less evolve to a certain extent. Only the human race is still stagnant. Only one awakened person may be born among hundreds or thousands of human beings. It is no wonder that the status of human beings is declining day by day. Thinking of this, Mewtwo suddenly remembered the previous titles of these orc overseers. What did they mean by the alien just now? The old man first looked at Mewtwo with surprise, feeling that the questions he asked were extremely weird, as if he were a primitive man who had just arrived in this era. But intimidated by Mewtwo's powerful strength, she still answered honestly. After listening to the old man's explanation, Mewtwo finally understood that in this era where foreign races are everywhere, all races in the world are under the rule of the Yonjai dynasty, and there is no concept of awakened people and heretics. On the contrary, due to human beings' own weakness, only one being with supernatural powers may appear among hundreds of people, and such human beings are called others by the world. After getting some information about this era from the old man's mouth, Mewtwo couldn't help but feel amazed. In just 1,000 years, the rule of the human race has collapsed, all races have evolved, and the royal family of Yonjai has become the supreme master over all races. And he, the creator of the Eternal Night dynasty, was revered by the world as the first demon lord and became a legend only recorded in the annals of history. While Mewtwo was thinking to herself, a pitiful shouting and wailing sound came from the distance. The humans around seemed to have thought of something and quickly looked in the direction of somewhere. I saw that the group of humans who had just fled from the team had already run to the foot of a hill in the distance. But before the humans who escaped could escape from the mine, they were already dead on the spot, dripping with blood and lying in the sand. There were also people who were running frantically on the sand filled with corpses, trying to escape from this hell on earth, but in an instant they were cut into a pile of flesh with a sharp knife, leaving no intact corpses. There was a faint burst of crazy laughter from the other side of the hill, blowing along with the wild wind and sand. At the end of the horizon, you can vaguely see hundreds of tall figures riding strong horses, holding weapons, and looking fierce. Without exception, these figures all have ferocious orc faces. It's the orc army guarding the mine. It's over, now we are all going to die here. The many humans who stayed in place looked desperate, dropped the oars in their hands and cried in their arms. The old man who had just been talking to Muchu also felt his legs weaken at this moment, and almost fell to his knees. He looked at Muchu and said in an old voice, "Lord Stranger, you'd better leave here as soon as possible. They are all subordinates of Lord Machin. If you offend Lord Machin, you won't be able to survive in the northern desert." But unexpectedly, facing the surging orc army, a meaningful smile appeared on Muchu's face. "Forget it, let me see how the strength of the creatures in this era has changed after thousands of years." Muchu's left palm was seen burning with a large red flame of a candle dragon, and a flash of thunder erupted from his right hand. The sand beneath his feet sank in an instant, and an extremely terrifying power suddenly spread from around him. The orcs who were riding fat horses originally rushed towards the crowd with ferocious faces and started a brutal massacre. But the moment they felt this power, the expressions of the orcs suddenly changed. Even the horses underneath them turned their eyes upward, hissed, and trembled in their nasal cavities. Some horses even fell to the ground. Before many of the orcs could recover from their fright, the terrifying aura in front was already coming, mixed with the monstrous thunder and flames. At this moment, the orc army that was supposed to launch a bloody massacre against humans was instead slaughtered by a figure rushing out from the crowd. Hot flames intertwined with thunder and penetrated the mountains in the distance, while hundreds of charred corpses were already lying on the ground. After a brief fight with the orc army, Muchu discovered that the strength of these orcs were generally at the B level and C level levels, and occasionally a few A level ones could be seen. Moreover, most of their abilities are to increase physical fitness, and only a few can see some special types of abilities. However, you must know that in Muchu's post-apocalyptic world, even A-level awakeners can thrive in a base, but here they are just ordinary guards. Compared with the apocalypse 1,000 years ago, the strength of today's 10,000 races is obviously much higher. Call. The hurricane mixed with yellow sand roared across the vast desert, covering the ground with corpses that were turned into charcoal. The blown yellow sand covered the pool of blood flowing into the river, dyeing the sand brown. Not far away, the remaining humans looked at the tragic scene with corpses strewn across the field and rivers of blood in front of them in horror, and their whole bodies could not help but tremble. They were just a group of enslaved slaves. Have they ever seen such a horrific scene? In the middle of the pile of corpses on the ground, the only one standing was a figure in black robes, with broken hair fluttering in the wind on his forehead, and an indifferent smile on his handsome face. Immediately afterwards, they watched helplessly as the figure slowly turned into a bunch of black and red flames and dissipated on the spot. On the mountains a few kilometers away, the blazing black flames condensed Muchu's figure. Standing on the towering mountains, Muchu looked down. At the end of the stretching gobe, she could vaguely see a patch of green. Muchu raised her hand, and a dazzling white light suddenly bloomed in her palm. This beam of light soars into the sky, and there is a faint intersection of gold and silver. Amidst the clouds and mist, a door with a simple atmosphere emerges. The chains turned into hazy beams of light are like cloud dragons and giant pythons, intertwining around the portal, blocking out the sky and the sun, and dividing the sky into two sides of gold and silver. Muchu narrowed her eyes slightly and looked up at the heavenly gate above her head. This is the item he got from signing in during this trip, the Gate of Reincarnation. Different from previous check-ins, what the system brought to him this time was not some special ability, but a mysterious prop known as the Gate of Reincarnation. Reincarnation. Recalling the mysterious white-robed figure, the aura emanating from the Gate of Reincarnation made him feel a little familiar. The breath of the power of time and space. His intuition told him that hidden in this door was the key to his return to 1,000 years ago. It's a pity that he still doesn't know how to open this door of reincarnation with the power of time and space. Narrowing her eyes, Miu took a shot with her palm, and the beam of light soaring into the sky disappeared. The clouds and mist on the horizon immediately dissipated, and the gate of reincarnation disappeared under the sky. Forget it, at this point we can only take one step at a time. Miu has never been a pessimist, even in this strange era thousands of years later. As long as he has come, he will be at ease. What brings him such great confidence is the same source. That is unrivaled power. He looked towards the blue sky in the distance and laughed heartily. Then let me take a look, what will it be like in the prosperous age of all races in this 1,000 years? Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 514. The dim light released by the candlelight illuminated the woman's fair cheeks. Eyelashes trembling, Yefanyan frowned while lying on the bed, and slowly opened his eyes the next second. Yefanyan woke up slowly and looked around, and found that he was in a dilapidated tile-roofed house. The surrounding walls are in disrepair, and the bare wooden boards inside have been exposed, and there are still a few rays of dim light coming through from the roof. "Hey, Grandma, the beautiful sister is awake." A childish voice sounded from the side, and a girl with braids was seen standing beside the bed holding a basin of water, pointing at Yefanyan who had woken up. "I am." Yefanyan rubbed her temples with a headache. She remembered that she was still in the beast's nest where the human race and the beast race were fighting. The battle entered a fierce stage, and the Eternal Night Dynasty suddenly joined the battlefield, and Miu beside him also transformed into the Lord of Eternal Night and shocked the audience. All kinds of memories came to mind, making Yefanyan's head hurt. She never thought that Chiu-Mu, whom she had always trusted, would become her imaginary enemy deep in her heart after her identity was revealed, the Lord of Eternal Night. Then the shocking battle between Miu and Thunder God shocked the world. The former's strength once made Yefanyan feel in a trance. Then, she remembered that just as the war was coming to an end, the jade pendant on her chest suddenly flashed with a dazzling golden light, and then she lost her memory. Vaguely, she seemed to see a figure wrapped in a white robe saying something to her. "This is, what place?" Yefanyan covered her aching head and looked at the little girl beside the bed. The girl was wearing a worn and patched linen garment. She turned her head and looked at Yefanyan, obviously not understanding what she was talking about. At this moment, there was a sudden sound of footsteps outside the house, and an old woman slowly walked in holding a bowl in her hand. "Child, are you awake?" After entering the house, the old man looked at Yefanyan and said with a kind face, "This morning we went to fetch water outside the village and accidentally found you lying on the shore, so we brought you back to the village." As he said that, the old man rubbed the little girl's head with a loving look on his face. "Thanks." Although the old man's words always sounded a bit strange, Yefanyan still subconsciously thanked him. "Little girl, I see that you are also a pure-blooded human race. I don't know where you come from. It's so dangerous outside now, so you have to be careful. If a beautiful girl like you is captured by those Yanjai nobles, she will be offended." The old man looked at Yefanyan's delicate face and couldn't help but feel pity for her. However, just as the old man finished speaking, Yefanyan's expression suddenly changed and she murmured, "Pure-blooded humans, people of the Yanjai clan." Her pupils shrank suddenly, and then asked, "Old lady, where is this place?" Yefanyan's strange behavior made the old man a little puzzled, but he still said truthfully, "This is Nanwu City under the jurisdiction of Lord Wuqi." "Girl, are you a slave who escaped from the city?" Hearing this, the look of shock on Yefanyan's face became even more intense. Her eyes trembled and she asked the old man incredulously, "Old lady, what time is it now?" The old man sighed. It seemed that the poor child had not suffered in the city. Child, it's already been 1001 years in the Evernight calendar, and I don't know when the suffering of our human race will be over. But the old man stopped talking. She found that the beautiful girl sitting on the bed suddenly looked stunned, as if she had been struck by lightning. A line of clear tears flowed down the corner of the woman's eyes. I'm back, I actually went back 1,000 years later. Yefenyan subconsciously looked at the jade pendant hanging around his neck. The jade pendant had become completely dim and all the energy inside had been consumed by it. This jade pendant actually took her through time and space once again, returning to the world 1,000 years later. Thinking of his experiences in the apocalypse and all the encounters after meeting Muqiu, Yefenyan's eyes flashed, and he couldn't hide the complicated look on his face. I don't belong to that world, maybe this is the best ending. At least in this era, she doesn't have to face the Lord of Eternal Night, nor does she have to fight with Muqiu. Thinking of this, Yefenyan clenched the jade pendant on his chest, with a look of determination in his eyes. Since she can't reverse the past, she can change the future. She wants to save the fate of humanity and save mankind from this world that is about to collapse. At this moment, the sound of human cries and cries suddenly came from the distant village, mixed with a burst of violent evil laughter that reached several people's ears. Yefenyan looked through the dilapidated doors and windows and saw that the sky on the other side of the village had been shrouded in darkness. It's the Night Clan. They're here again. There was a tremor in the old man's voice, and every once in a while, the surrounding Night Clan people would invade the surrounding human villages. They burned, killed, and looted the human villages, but they failed to wipe out all the human beings. Instead, they playfully toy with humans like they are raising livestock. Countless humans have been toyed with to death by the Night Clan. Hearing the old man's desperate trembling voice, Yefenyan's eyes flashed with coldness. In front of her chest, a golden holy sword slowly emerged. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 515. The Yonjai dynasty is located in a town on the border of the northern desert. The noisy market is filled with people and horses passing by. The cries of street vendors came from around the street, and a bustling scene emerged spontaneously. What's surprising is that most of the figures walking on the roadside are weird-looking humanoid creatures. Some figures have beast-like heads and burly bodies, walking openly on the streets. Others are simply mutated monsters with ferocious faces and intimidating features, exuding a terrifying aura that makes people around them stay away. On a certain street in the market, people were passing by in a hurry, and a figure in black robe was walking slowly and leisurely, with a dark red prajna mask hanging around his waist. Muqiu glanced at the strange-shaped buildings on both sides, which had a strong alien style, and suddenly thought that she had traveled to another world. It's funny, he hasn't felt this lively and prosperous atmosphere in the apocalypse for a long time. Meow. At this moment, a soft cat meow suddenly came from his arms. A black kitten was seen being held in Muqiu's arms, with a rising flame burning at its tail. The black cat gently nuzzled Muqiu's clothes with its little head, meowing softly. Muqiu smiled when she saw this, stretched out her hand to scratch the kitten's chin, and teased. "You little guy aren't hungry again, are you?" The black cat in his arms is the former Mangshan Qianhu, the mount of the Lord of Eternal Night, the netherworld evil tiger. At this moment, 10 days have passed since Muqiu left the Bamo mine. In fact, with Muqiu's speed, it wouldn't take so long, but Muqiu ignored the most important point. He forgot to ask for the direction to leave the Bay Desert, so he wandered around the Bay Desert mine for nearly 10 days before arriving at the town closest to the mine. During this period, he accidentally broke into countless ferocious beast lairs hidden in the desert, and by the way sent these monsters who did not know whether to live or die into another world. If there are caravans or miners who go deep into the mountains now, they will be surprised to find that there is not a single vicious beast in the entire desert. Looking at the bustling alien races around and the rows of houses built on both sides, Mu couldn't help but lament the rapid development of the times. In just a few thousand years, the world has gone from total collapse to a new civilization. There was just one thing that puzzled Mu. Although strange alien culture could be seen here, there was no sign of the existence of technology. The whole town felt more like a bustling and noisy alien town, but there was no trace of technological development. It stands to reason that even after Mu disappears, the Yonjai dynasty still has the inheritance of Zilan base. People like Zhou Yi, the leader of the resistance army, and Duan Muking, the younger brother of Duan Muchen, the former ruler of Zilan base, are all top scientists in the world. Under the leadership of these scientists, the technology of the Yonjai dynasty will not regress to this point. Mu slowly shook her head. In any case, these had nothing to do with her. After all, he was just a passerby in this era, and Mu had never been too lazy to manage these government affairs. The top priority is to find a way to open the door to reincarnation as soon as possible. Returning to the original era, Mu has not yet settled the accounts with the foreign cult. The capital of Eternal Night. Recalling the next check-in location mentioned by the system, if she couldn't find any clues, Mu could only go to the next check-in location first to see if she could gain anything. From time to time, the shouts of foreign hawkers came from both sides. The high-quality ore mined in the northern desert mine is the best material for making magic weapons. If you are passing by, come and take a look. There are fine pure-blooded human slaves, men, women, old, and young. They live well and are cheap, so come and take a look. Mu stopped next to a shop. What was sold inside was not ordinary goods, but living human beings. In front of the store's containers, a row of weakened, sallow-looking humans were seen hanging on wooden beams, like animals waiting to be slaughtered, with numb and desperate expressions. Among these people are elderly people in their 60s or 70s, skinny young men in their prime, and even teenage girls in their prime. Without exception, these humans wore collars around their necks and were half-clothed. Some of them had staggered scars clearly visible on their bodies. These are all fresh goods caught from the human village not long ago. If you miss it, you will lose it. Many aliens gathered in front of the shelves, pointing and commenting on the human slaves inside. Finally, an orc took a fancy to one of the human girls. After paying a certain amount of money to the vendor, he pulled the human girl out of the store like a pet by holding an iron chain. From the beginning to the end, there was no change in the faces of all the foreigners, as if the transaction happening in front of them was a normal thing. Seeing this scene, Mu face showed a look of indifference, and she calmly looked at everything in front of her. Naturally, he had no intention of rescuing these human slaves. In other words, the reason why he created the Eternal Night Royal Clan was precisely to compete with the existence of the human race and the zombie race in the end of the world. Holding the black cat in her arms, Mu slowly turned and left. Strangely, although he looked like a human, the aliens around him passed by him one after another, as if they had never noticed him. Since he was promoted to Deyuan level, Mu has entered a state of unity between man and nature. As long as he does not actively reveal his presence, it is difficult for ordinary beings to notice his existence. At this moment, Mu seemed to feel something and suddenly looked up. In the sky above, several figures could be vaguely seen flashing in the sky. Mu realized that these figures were actually some beings with A-level strength, and the leader's body was emitting S-level energy fluctuations. Mu was amazed. It seems that the overall strength of this era has really improved a lot. If it were in the end of the world, there would not be a few S-level awakeners in a base, but it was obvious in this border town. Mu bought 2 skewers from a roadside shop and smelled them. Well, it's not human flesh. He took a bite and handed another skewer of meat to the black cat in his arms. One person and one cat strolled in the prosperous foreign town, admiring the culture of thousands of years later, which was quite interesting. Meow. Just when Miu lamented that time flies and he was out of touch with the times, the black cat in his arms suddenly called out. Miu turned his head and looked in one direction, only to see that it was also a shop selling human slaves. But unlike the previous shop, the slaves here were all enclosed in a large cage, like livestock. There were also some old people and children locked up inside, and some young men and women had been bought early, leaving only the breath of despair spreading in the cage of several square meters. And what Miu was looking at was a petite figure in a corner of the cage. It was a petite girl with short hair, wearing a fairly neat linen shirt, curled up in a corner of the cage with her hands on her knees. The girl had short orange-yellow hair. She noticed someone was watching her and raised her head. Miu then discovered that she had a pair of feline ears on her head and a faint energy wave emanating from her body. Their eyes met, and they stared at each other for several breaths. After a few seconds, looking at each other's gaze, they both said in surprise, "Can you see me?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 516. Miu's eyes were a little strange. As a Deyuan level warrior, he had already achieved the unity of man and nature. As long as he did not expose himself, even an S-level warrior would not be able to detect his existence. But the energy fluctuations emitted by the girl in front of him were better than nothing. It was obvious that she was not a powerful warrior. How did she find him? Moreover, this girl obviously had superpowers, so why did she run to the cage and stay with human slaves? Miu felt that the girl's behavior was a little strange. At this moment, the girl seemed to realize that she had said something wrong. She quickly covered her mouth and lowered her head in panic, not daring to look at Miu again. Looking at the girl's strange behavior, Miu showed a smile in his eyes. He suddenly turned around and called the vendor, pointing in the direction of the girl in the cage. "I want to buy that slave." The vendor was holding a whip and beating a disobedient slave. Hearing this, he said without turning his head, 50 white magic crystals for one human, no return for life, old age, sickness, or death. Miu learned from the old miner that the so-called magic crystals were actually energy crystal cores, but they were just called differently after 1,000 years. He swept the desert all the way, destroyed countless beast nests, and got some energy crystal cores. In addition to the crystal cores thrown to the black cat to make candy beans, there were some leftovers. He turned around and threw a blue crystal core to the vendor, and then swaggered towards the girl in the corner of the cage. The vendor was still beating the slave vigorously, but a blue light suddenly flashed on the ground next to him. He looked closely and found that it was a blue crystal core that was shining with a faint light. The vendor's face immediately showed a flattering expression. He walked to Miu and said with a flattering smile, "You can choose any slave you like." Before he finished speaking, he realized that the man in front of him actually had a human face. But he also noticed the kitten burning with black and red flames in Miu's arms. With the attitude of less trouble is worse than more trouble, the vendor did not say much. Miu just shook his head, turned and walked into the cage to take the iron chain that bound the girl's hands and feet, and smiled. "I want this one." After that, he led the girl to the end of the street in the distance. The girl curled up in the corner originally wanted to get away with it, hiding her head in her knees, muttering, "Can't see me, can't see me." But who knew that Miu went directly into the cage and grabbed her iron chain neatly, and led her away as if he was going straight to the point. The girl was so scared that the animal ears on her head were folded into a pair of airplane ears and stuck to her head. She lowered her head and followed Miu as if she had lost all hope in life. Looking at the backs of the two people leaving, the vendor held the blue energy crystal core and scratched his head in confusion. Strange, why don't I remember taking such a slave? Miuchiu led the girl through the street like a pet and walked into a dark alley. Suddenly, Miuchiu stopped and the iron chain in his hand made a trembling sound on the ground. The girl bound by the iron chain trembled immediately and looked up at Miuchiu cautiously. Once again, their eyes met, and Miuchiu stared at her with a pair of smiling eyes, and said playfully, "Tell me, little girl, what are you doing here?" In the center of the Eternal Night Dynasty, in the prosperous city called Wangdu, a majestic palace stands in the center of the capital, like an almighty demon king looking at the common people from afar. The interior of the palace was deep and quiet, and in the depths of the dim hall, a hurried sound of footsteps suddenly sounded. A figure in a purple robe pushed open the heavy door of the palace and walked in quickly. He knelt down in front of the throne in the depths of the hall with a thump. "Your Majesty, the High Priest predicted that according to the star fate will that appeared a few days ago, the disaster will come to the world. The existence that brought devastating disaster to my Eternal Night Dynasty in the prophecy, has come to the world." The words of the purple-robed man were firm, but his voice was trembling, as if it had been predicted before, and the strange phenomenon today was a fulfillment. As the purple-robed man finished speaking, the whole hall fell into a long silence. "I naturally trust the High Priest's prophecy." After a while, a deep voice came from the dark throne, and a huge black shadow and a pair of blood-red pupils could be vaguely seen. "Pass my personal order to wipe out all the creatures born in the eternal night in the past month." The existence on the throne gave an order that was enough to shock all races, and frightened the purple-robed man who was kneeling on the ground below and said hurriedly, But, those adults of the royal family." A faint light suddenly appeared in front of the purple-robed man from the throne. It was a palm-sized token with a strange flame burning on it. On the front of the token, an extremely ostentatious word "Knight" was engraved. "This order is here, just like I am here in person." The deep voice mixed with terrifying power was like thunder in the purple-robed man's mind. He was shocked and responded, "I will obey the king's order." After that, he stood up and walked out of the palace, with an unprecedented solemnity on his face. He knew that once the king's decree was issued, it would destroy the lives of countless newborns of the Night Clan and cause a shock to all the clans of the Eternal Night Dynasty. As the palace door closed, the entire hall became dark and silent again. On the throne, a pair of blood-red pupils suddenly opened, and a low voice echoed in the palace. "Time is running out. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord." Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 517. Qi Xiaoxiao felt that she was in bad luck today. She bought the high-end breath-absorbing powder from the most luxurious store in the city. The store said it was produced from the high-level monster shape-shifting snake, but it turned out to be of no use at all. Profiteer. The promised effect is significant, lasts for a long time, and is difficult for the Lord level to see through. As a result, she was bought as a slave within half a day of hiding in the cage. Thinking of the treacherous smile on the vendor's face, Qi Xiaoxiao couldn't help but grit his teeth and wanted to jump for it. But now that she has been taken away as a slave, her top priority is to escape from the clutches of the man in front of her as soon as possible so as not to attract the attention of others. However, just when the girl was still secretly worried about how to escape from the clutches of the slave owner, the man in front of her led her into a dark alley on the street and suddenly stopped. Miuchiu turned around and looked at the girl who was being led by the iron chain. There was a bit of playfulness in her eyes and she said with a smile, "Tell me, what did you do when you got into the cage?" Miuchiu could detect that the girl in front of her had a layer of aura-shielding medicinal powder attached to her body. Miuchiu was curious as to what was the reason for him to sneak into the slave's cage. The magnetic voice reached her ears. The girl raised her head and saw Miuchiu's smiling face. Seeing this handsome face, the girl couldn't help but open her mouth wide and exclaimed, "WWW. Human." She was too panicked just now and didn't pay attention, and it wasn't until now that she saw the true face of the man who bought her. She didn't expect that the person who bought her was actually a human. You know, ordinary humans are not only subject to discrimination from various ethnic groups, but are also subject to many restrictions on purchasing goods. This human man actually dares to appear on the streets of cities and towns with such arrogance. Why, you seem surprised. Miu didn't seem to realize how shocked her human appearance was to the girl in front of her, and stared at her with deep meaning in her eyes. The black cat in her arms obediently rubbed the skirt of Miu's chest, meowing softly. While Miu was staring at the girl, Qi Xiaoxiao was also sizing up the black-robed man in front of her. This man was not as tall and rough-looking as ordinary orcs, but he had a handsome appearance with thin skin and tender flesh. A crimson ferocious mask hung around his waist, but his face showed an indifferent expression that Qi Xiaoxiao had never seen on other human faces. Qi Xiaoxiao has never seen this expression on other human beings, and she only thinks that the man in front of her is quite strange. She couldn't help but swallow her saliva, took a few steps back, and said hurriedly, Big brother, you misunderstood, I just accidentally went to the wrong place, now, I will leave here now." After saying that, the little girl shook her slender hands, and she actually wore a pair of crystal jade bracelets on her wrists. As a dense light flashed on the jade bracelet, a jade bottle appeared in the girl's hand. She dripped the liquid in the jade bottle onto the chains that bound her hands and feet. The black liquid touched the iron shackles, and the solid shackles dissolved like pudding. The girl's figure also jumped back lightly and escaped from the shackles. The whole process happened in just a few seconds. The girl escaped from the shackles like a magic trick, and then ran towards the alley behind her. "Excuse me, goodbye." Qi Xiaoxiao waved back and ran away without stopping. However, before she could take 2 steps, she bumped into a tall chest. The girl took a few steps back and almost fell to the ground. She covered her red nose and raised her head to look at the figure blocking her in front of her. As a result, when she saw it, the little girl's eyes suddenly became surprised. The person blocking her was the human man just now. She looked back suddenly, and sure enough, the black-robed figure behind her had disappeared. At this time, the little girl's expression became completely panicked, and she clasped her hands together and said, "Brother, I'm begging you, please let me go. No big deal, I'll just give you a blue magic crystal back." Qi Xiaoxiao nodded repeatedly and complained, but a pair of smart eyes looked towards Miu, waiting for an opportunity to escape. Miu noticed the other party's little moves, but was not angry at all. She just smiled and said, "What did you call me?" In an instant, Qi Xiaoxiao felt an extremely cold and terrifying aura lingering in his heart, as if locked by countless pairs of blood-red pupils. She had a vague feeling that as long as she took one step forward, she would die on the spot in the next second. "Will die? Really gonna die?" Qi Xiaoxiao raised his head stiffly, and what he faced was Miu's smiling face like a spring breeze. A forced smile appeared on her lips and she said softly, "Lord, Master." At this moment, she finally understood the difference in strength between her and the person in front of her. The other person was not something she could fight against. Miu nodded with satisfaction, but looked at the jade bracelet on the girl's wrist. He felt a strange energy fluctuation on the jade bracelet. That's the breath of space energy. The girl in front of her is wearing a space storage prop made of space crystal cores. Such space props will be extremely rare even in later generations, and even more rare in the apocalypse. Miu looked at the girl with a flattering smile, and felt that the latter's origin was more and more unusual. After a while, Miu and the girl appeared on the bustling street of the market. But this time, the shackles on the girl had been removed, and 2 figures, one big and one small, walked side by side. "What's your name?" The girl trembled when she saw Miu speak, and a pair of folded ears pressed against her head, but she still said honestly and crisply, "Chi. Chi xiao xiao. Chi xiao xiao." Mu Qiu murmured the name, but he did not feel the blood of the Eternal Night Clan from the other party. The girl's strength was also quite low, and it seemed that she was only B level or C level. "Do you know how far this place is from the Eternal Night King's capital?" Seeing that the girl was unwilling to mention her origin, Mu Qiu did not continue to ask. Compared with the girl's origin, Mu Qiu was more interested in the destination of his trip. Eternal Night King's capital. Qi Xiaoxiao raised her head, not knowing what the human next to her was going to do in the Eternal Night capital. But her life was in the hands of the other person, so she nodded hurriedly, thinking for a while and said, "The Northern Desert Territory is the extreme north. If you want to go to the Eternal Night capital, it will take at least thousands of kilometers." Seeing that Qi Xiaoxiao seemed to be familiar with the route to the Eternal Night capital, Mu Qiu nodded with satisfaction. Now that there is a familiar guide, it will be much more convenient. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 518. Gurgle. Just when Mu Qiu was planning to learn more about the news of the Eternal Night capital, the girl next to him had a gurgling sound in her stomach. Qi Xiaoxiao's sight suddenly became a little cramped, her pretty face blushed, and she subconsciously lowered her head to cover her stomach. She had been hiding in the cage for most of the day, and her stomach had long been empty, and she was so hungry that she was gurgling. Seeing this, Mu Qiu smiled and turned to the barbecue stall nearby. Fresh local chicken barbecue, fresh color, spicy and fragrant. The stall owner was a fat and sturdy man with a pair of devil-like horns on his head, and his skin was even more red. He was holding a palm leaf fan and selling hard. But when he saw Mu Qiu coming towards him, the expression on his face instantly became ferocious. "Where did you come from, you lowly people? Get out of here! How dare a mere human dare to hang around in front of me?" Seeing that Mu Qiu had a human face, the fat stall owner instantly changed his face, with anger on his face, and he was extremely disgusted with humans. A hint of coldness appeared in Mu Qiu's eyes, and a blood-red light flashed in his eyes. Meow. The black cat on his shoulder suddenly made a cry, and the hair on his back stood up. And the moment the orc stall owner looked at Mu Qiu, he seemed to see something extremely terrifying. His mouth opened wide, his pupils opened wide, his eyeballs were full of bloodshot, and the expression on his face froze instantly, and the whole person froze in place. Mu Qiu picked up a few skewers of meat on the stall lightly, turned around and walked towards Qi Xiaoxiao on the side. He first gave one to the black cat on his shoulder, then bowed slightly, smiled and handed the skewer in his hand to the girl. "Lead the way, this is the reward." The girl took the skewer and looked at Mu Qiu's slightly curved eyes. Suddenly, she felt that the human in front of her didn't seem so scary. Qi Xiaoxiao didn't expect that one day she would be bribed by a few skewers of meat. But it is undeniable that Qi Xiaoxiao's guard against the man in front of her did drop a little. Although her pitiful guard was meaningless, Mu Qiu could actually use the ability of soul binding to forcibly spy on everything he wanted to know, but Mu Qiu rarely used this ability. Because it means that he will see everything hidden in the other person's heart, including the dirtiest, filthiest, and ugliest human nature in the soul. Even Mu Qiu hates those ugly souls and is unwilling to contact them. You can easily deprive sentient beings of their lives, but you can't change the essence of their souls. Shortly after Mu Qiu and the others left, the fat orc stall owner was still standing stiffly. Seeing this, a vendor came up and said casually, "Are you okay? What did you say just now?" As he said that, he patted the orc stall owner's shoulder, but the latter's 7 orifices began to bleed uncontrollably. This scene scared the stall owner on the side, and he stepped back hurriedly. "You, what's wrong with you?" The next second after the voice fell, the fat body of the orc stall owner suddenly poofed into a pool of blood mud, causing a burst of exclamations from others. When the uproar on the street sounded, Mu Qiu had already walked a long way with Qi Xiaoxiao. Qi Xiaoxiao's senses were sharp, as if she heard something coming from the market behind, and she looked back from time to time. Mu Qiu looked at the architectural styles on both sides that were very different from the modern urban society, and couldn't help asking, "Why can't we see any trace of technology in the city here?" Technology. Qi Xiaoxiao pondered the word technology over and over again, as if she hadn't come into contact with it for a long time. After a while, she recalled this word from her mind, and suddenly realized. Since 1,000 years ago, human technology was abolished by the second generation of demon lords at that time. Second generation of demon lords. Mu Qiu's eyes flashed, and he was a little curious about who took over the management of the Eternal Night clan from him. Speaking of the second generation of the demon lord, the little girl's interest obviously increased a lot, and she said excitedly, "Yes, it seems that the development of human technology has been restricted since the second generation of the demon lord, and until the third generation of the demon lord, human technology has almost disappeared." "Who is the second generation of the demon lord you are talking about?" Hearing Mu Qiu's question, Qi Xiaoxiao's eyes suddenly flashed with admiration. "She is the creator of the Eternal Night royal family in the rumor, the disciple of the Lord of the Eternal Night, and the second generation of the demon lord who was later honored as the ghost demon lord. Shueqianya. Is it her?" Mu Qiu couldn't help but think of a girl with long black hair wearing a purple dress and a cold face. He really didn't expect that the one who took over the Eternal Night dynasty from him was the dull Shueqianya. It's hard to imagine how she led the Eternal Night dynasty to eliminate zombies in the cruel apocalypse, sweeping across major human bases, and ending that great apocalypse. Thinking of this, Mu Qiu couldn't help but find it very interesting. Just when Mu Qiu arrived at the town, there was new movement in the Bamo mine hundreds of kilometers away. Accompanied by a painful wail of human beings, a broken body fell bloody on the sand. The desolate sand was covered with human remains, countless broken heads, and the eyes were filled with despair. "Help, help, don't kill me." A human man fell to the ground and crawled back in a hurry. But his head was grabbed by a big hand, and the whole person was lifted up. In front of him was a huge army of orcs. An orc grabbed the man and asked fiercely, "Tell me, who did it?" The human man was panicked and he hesitated for a long time. The orc in leather armor looked at his companion behind him. The companion understood, took out a piece of white paper and walked forward, looking into the eyes of the man in the orc's hand. The man's eyes flashed with a strange white light, and he first made a strange cry, then his brain became blank, and the whole person also smiled stupidly with a dull look. On the other hand, the figure of a man in a black robe appeared on the white paper in the orc's hand. "Is that him?" The orc made a low voice, and then used his big hand to crush the stupid man's head like a melon rind. "How dare a mere human run wild in the northern desert? Order the entire northern desert to arrest this man with all your strength." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 519. Qi Xiaoxiao felt that the human man next to him was strange. Although he has the appearance of a human being, he wants to go to the royal capital of Evernight where the royal family is rampant and the classes are distinct. The royal family of Yanjai is extremely repulsive to human beings. If ordinary human beings go to the royal capital, it is tantamount to seeking death. Moreover, during the 2 days when the other party bought her, he asked countless common-sense questions that even a 3-year-old child would know, which made Qi Xiaoxiao extremely puzzled. From the development of the Yanjai dynasty to how the human race declined, All the answers made Chi Xiao feel a little thirsty. She suddenly remembered that some human races would migrate to the deep mountains and forests to survive in order to avoid the oppression of foreign races. Occasionally, there are rumors of powerful humans jumping out of the mountains. These humans have lived in the mountains for a long time and are far away from the outside world. Naturally, they don't know much about these common sense things. Presumably the human man next to him is also in the same situation, right? Well, that must be the case. Unintentionally, the little girl had already regarded Mu as a hidden and strong person who was not born in the human race. You seem to know the second-generation demon lord very well. Mu looked at the girl who seemed to be deep in thought from the side and asked meaningfully. Along the way, Mu asked a lot about the history of the development of the Yanjai dynasty. The little girl seemed to have great respect for Shueqianya, the second-generation demon lord. When Mu mentioned the name of the second-generation demon lord, the little girl couldn't help but get excited again, nodded, and said with bright eyes. The second-generation demon lord is not only a direct disciple of the Lord of Eternal Night, but also the only female among all the demon lords in history. It was precisely because of the rise of the second-generation demon lord that he suppressed the entire zombie clan that ushered in the end of the apocalyptic catastrophe 1,000 years ago. The girl's eyes sparkled with admiration. My dream is to become a great and powerful man like the second-generation demon lord. Mu looked at the excited look on the girl's face and couldn't help shaking her head and laughing. From this point of view, Shueqianya has indeed paid a lot for the Yanjai royal family. As for why technology in this era has disappeared, Mu thinks it is probably because Shueqianya was once imprisoned in Zilan base, and her parents who turned into zombies were killed by the invasion of Zilan base. Therefore, they are disgusted with the technological products there, and the deliberate suppression of technology has led to the gradual decline of human technology. From the conversation with Chi Xiao, Mu also learned some history that he didn't know. For example, Mu, the third-generation demon lord after Shueqianya, was actually impressed. The name of the third-generation demon lord is Yewuchen. The image of a little boy with bruised skin and a confused look appeared in Mu's mind. He remembered that this Yewuchen was the disciple accepted by Ji Yufeng. He also had space abilities. Later, he was brought into southern Xinjiang by Fatty and used his space to travel through the beast's nest. Unexpectedly, this little kid who was frightened to death when he saw Mu would eventually become the third-generation demon lord. From Chi Xiaoxiu's words, it seems that it was after Yewuchen became the demon lord that the human race gradually declined, and even became the last of all races. People like Xiao Hanyan, Ji Yufeng, Zhang Yuan, Wei Ying, and others also left a strong mark on the history of the Yanjai dynasty. Mu listened to Chi Xiaoxiu's narration as if she was following a story, with a faint light flashing in her eyes from time to time. Mu felt quite emotional to hear these familiar names from the descendants. It's like a blur, 1,000 years have passed. Mu and Chi Xiaoxiao had another conversation. Basically, Mu asked questions and the latter answered them. www. At this time, Mu's face was hidden under the hood and was blurry. Because there was a girl with animal ears following him, Mu also received a lot of attention. In the past 2 days, he had been harassed by countless aliens because of his human appearance. After quietly killing these ants, Mu gradually felt bored and simply put on a hood to cover up. After all, he is a passerby in this era. As long as others don't provoke Mu, there is no need for him to go to war with these descendants. After spending 2 days, Mu Qiashao took many detours under the leadership of Chi Xiaoxiao, and the two of them arrived at another town. Unlike the previous border town, Mu noticed that the city no longer had all kinds of strange foods being sold on the roadside. Instead, there are many iron shops passing by, and the sound of forging is accompanied by fierce sparks beating in front of the paving. There were strange-looking weapons hanging in front of the stalls on both sides, flashing with a cold light under the scorching sun. Yu paid attention to these strange weapons, which actually contained faint energy fluctuations. These weapons are all made of energy crystal cores. After thousands of years, people in the world have also developed many uses for these energy crystal nuclei containing supernatural energy. Chi Xiao, a girl with animal ears, noticed Yu's gaze and explained crisply. Gotan City is a major weapons city in the northern desert. It is responsible for the forging and smelting of the entire northern desert's magic weapons. Even the magic soldiers of the northern desert army are produced here. Magic soldier. Yu looked at the many weapons placed in the surrounding stalls. It was obvious that after 1,000 years, crystalline nuclear weapons had spread to the entire world. Speaking of which, the concept of crystalline nuclear weapons originally originated from the box weapons developed at Zilan base. Owning a powerful crystal core weapon is equivalent to doubling or even multiplying the strength of an awakener. Just like the three sacred objects of Zilan base, Shueqin, who was only S-level in the past, could compete with the destruction-level strongmen by driving the apocalypse armor. Just as Yu was secretly pondering whether the demon sword Yan Mo in his hand could crush these so-called demon weapons. Suddenly, a horn sounded from the street far away, and it echoed clearly over the whole town in a moment. Then, the whole street began to boil, and many aliens showed excitement on their faces. It's the arena, today's arena has begun. Go over quickly, I must bet to the end today. With your bad luck, you still want to bet on the winning side. The final winner must be me. Countless figures rushed to the direction of the distant horn. The crowd around them rushed forward noisily, but Yu and Chi Xiao stood there and looked a little out of place. Seeing this, Yu smiled, teased the black cat lying on his shoulder, and rubbed the head of the girl next to him with his other hand. Let's go, and see what's going on so lively. Yu's big hand attacked, making Chi Xiao's expression suddenly panic, her body trembled, and a pair of animal ears folded up. But there was only a gentle touch on her head that disappeared. Chi Xiao raised her head and saw Yu's back slowly walking forward. She felt that the human in front of her was a little weird. Didn't you say you were going to the capital of the eternal night? Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 520. When Yu and his partner followed the crowd to the center of the town, what appeared before them was actually a large coliseum surrounding the entire center of the town. Tall walls, iron fences, the style and characteristics of the entire building are almost the same as those of the ancient coliseum. After paying a certain amount of magic crystals, Yu and his partner walked in. At this moment, the Colosseum was already full of people of all ethnic groups who came to watch. Cheers, scolding, and various cheers were heard incessantly. People who didn't know would think that today was a special festival celebrated by the whole nation. The entire arena was already full, and there was a huge deep pit covering a wide area under the seats of the crowd. Obviously, that was the final battlefield of the beast fighting duel. Yu led Chi Xiao all the way to a place in the front row. With the latter's stunned expression, Yu walked to the two orcs sitting in the front row. Before he said a few words, the two orcs stood up directly, with a slightly dazed look on their faces, and actually left just like that. It was not until Yu sat in the front row and waved to Chi Xiao that the latter reacted. She hurriedly took small steps, sat next to Yu and asked, "How did you do it?" The girl's face was full of desire for knowledge, but Yu just responded with a meaningful smile, stroked the black cat in his arms, and said, "Tianlai novel network. Nothing, just a friendly exchange with them, the people here are easy to talk to." Chi Xiao's face was full of disbelief, but she didn't ask much. Her intuition told her that the human man next to her was very powerful. Soon after Yu and the others sat down, the battle in the Colosseum below had entered a white-hot stage. A ferocious giant dog with a collar around its neck was staring at the fence, its huge claws grinding deep dents on the ground, and its red eyes showed tyranny and hunger. And standing opposite it was not a wild beast, but a human man whose body shape was completely disproportionate to it. The human man's limbs were tightly shackled by thick iron chains, and the other end of the iron chain led directly to the deep fence passage behind him, which was unavoidable. The man held a steel knife in front of him, but his arm holding the knife was trembling. There was despair and fear in his eyes, and his body was shaking, and his legs and feet were sore and weak. Unlike the vicious dog in front of him, he was just an ordinary human slave. How could he be the opponent of this beast? The man was wearing a tattered linen shirt, and his body was skinny due to hunger for a long time. He didn't even have much strength to pick up a weapon. I admit. The man raised his hand tremblingly and wanted to admit defeat. However, with the referee's whistle, the ferocious giant dog had already rushed towards the man. The skinny human man didn't even have time to swing his sword to resist, and in a blink of an eye he was knocked to the ground by the huge vicious dog. The ferocious bloody mouth opened, and in a flash, the man's skin and flesh were torn apart, and blood was dripping. The man immediately screamed miserably, but before he could even scream for a few seconds, he had his throat bitten off by the vicious dog and died on the spot. The entire arena suddenly became extremely quiet, so quiet that only the chewing sound of the vicious dog below could be heard. The incomplete flesh and blood and the splattered blood stimulated the most primitive senses of every audience. Wow! Suddenly, the whole audience was in an uproar, and the audience from countless races in the seats began to cheer continuously, with undisguised excitement in their eyes. In the front row, Chi Xiao frowned slightly and lowered her head when she saw this scene. As if she thought of something, Chi Xiao suddenly raised her head and looked at the human man sitting next to her. But what she didn't expect was that Mu Chiu's face was always indifferent, and there was no trace of sympathy or anger. Amidst the cheers and applause from the surroundings, the ferocious giant dog also finished a delicious meal and stuck out its tongue with relish. Under him, where the human man had stood, there was already a bloody skeleton. Next, the referee gave another order, and the fence in front was slowly opened, and human slaves with chains on their limbs walked out one after another. But without exception, all these human slaves died tragically in the mouths of the ferocious giant dogs, causing the surrounding foreign audiences to cheer and their blood boiled. In their eyes, the human slaves standing in the Colosseum below were just like those ferocious beasts, just tools for their entertainment. As for the life and death of humans, they didn't care at all. No, don't come over. Another man let out a desperate wail, and his body retreated again and again, but behind him was the locked iron bars. The limbs tightly locked by the iron chains made it impossible for him to escape, and the ferocious giant dog had already pounced on him to the ground in the next second. In an instant, bright red blood spurted out, dyeing the surrounding ground red. The host standing in front of the stage also flipped a card made of animal skin beside him amid the cheers of the audience. There was a capital 9 on it. This also meant that from the beginning, 9 human slaves had died at the hands of the giant dog. Accompanied by a loud horn, the battle in the Colosseum below continued. The tall iron bars rose again, perhaps this meant that another life would die. A heavy sound of footsteps came from the dark corridor, and under the gaze of the crowd, a tall figure slowly walked out of the corridor. This was an extremely sturdy human man with a long braid behind his head and scars all over his sturdy chest. His limbs were bound by chains that were several times thicker than those of the previous few people, and he made a series of clattering sounds when he walked. The burly man looked around the scene with a sharp gaze, and he was not afraid even if the beast was right in front of him. Oh! When Mu Chiu saw the appearance of the burly man, his expression changed slightly, and then a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He felt a strong energy fluctuation from this man. In other words, the man below had superpowers and was an alien among humans.